Boy, oh boy, do I have something for you right now, man. 1 hour reaction to D-Day documentary, man. What? The Normandy landings, June 6, 1944. Done by Wars of the World. 6.6 million views. Let's take a look.
June 6th, 1944.
He's very quiet, isn't he?
A date that has become forever ingrained in the minds of the Western world.
This really happened, man. That's the first thing I feel. This
And the
really
long
happened,
march
dude.
toward the defeat of tyranny. Between 1939 and 1941, the forces of Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany blazed a path.
I'm drinking a coffee. I'm so fucking tired today because I didn't sleep at all.
Across the map of
But my
Europe.
goal about the caffeine addiction is I drink a coffee and then I'm not allowed to drink a coffee again for 1 week. That's kind of how I want to do that.
And beyond. And it seemed Hitler's ambition could...
Well, one of the main reasons I want to actually watch this is I like the real-life footage. It's so mind-blowing. It feels like a movie, but this shit really fucking happened, man.
never be satisfied. The world was his
Also, every time I see equipment, I'm like, what is that equipment and what's Ryan for?
goal. Death, his tool. Only a badly beaten and desperately holding on Britain managed to stem the wound long enough to guarantee that all of Europe wouldn't
Yeah,
be
the
drenched
British Air
in
War
the
was so
swastika.
important, man.
And yet,
Imagine the
within
Germans
just
would have
3
landed
years,
in Britain.
Canada, the United States...
I don't know, though. I feel like these Brits would have they would have fought like Ukraine, man. Your home country gets invaded, they would have fought so hard until their last breath, man. I don't know how well Germany could have done there.
And many other allied nations would amalgamate into a single force, and in one swift move, drive a
So did France. I'm going to be very offensive, but I have a weird feeling the British would have fought much harder than the French.
into the side of Hitler's dreams of total European
shit.
supremacy.
But no one's
That
getting
dagger was
MG'd.
driven in on the beaches of Normandy.
Wait, there's fucking bullets raining. Did you see
and then
that?
twisted into a
That was so
lethal
fucked up.
wound that would never close.
Oh, legendary picture
This
from Hot
is
Fire.
the story of Operation Overlord. The story
That's
of
Sherman.
D-Day. Welcome to Wars of the World.
But that must have felt like, man, to be part of D-Day. Planning and commanders.
On December 7th, 1941, Germany's ally, Japan, attacked the United States in the Pacific.
I wonder how they filmed all
In
this.
support of this Asian ally and in defiance of his generals, Hitler declared war on the United States.
In defiance of his generals, I didn't know that they actually were against declaration of war against the US. Hitler is, in my opinion, also maybe the best example of you shouldn't have one human being lead a country anymore. Even on lower scales, like a president or something. I've been saying this for a long time. I really disagree with a single person being a leader of a country, like a president or chancellor. I think the world is too complex nowadays, and there shouldn't be... Humans are too full of error, and one single human shouldn't lead a country, in my opinion.
On December 11th of that year, the vast industrial and agricultural base of the
Look at
United
how well
States,
this quality
to
is,
say
man.
nothing of the immense
This is like
manpower
really good
that
video
could now be
quality,
pitted against
dude.
Hitler, gave the Allied powers a new and wide array of possibilities in defeating the Nazi tyranny in Europe. The only question was how. Both Stalin in Moscow and many American military leaders pushed for a second front to be
Thank you,
opened as
Shumix.
soon
Thank you for
as
the prime.
possible,
Appreciate it, man.
most likely summer 1942. But Churchill and Roosevelt were far more cautious. British Commonwealth forces were still locked in bitter combat with the German and Italian forces in North Africa, a campaign that may have to be
Man,
abandoned.
there was so much
or
going
downscaled.
on in World War II, right? Like, it was a world war. It's crazy to think. You're like a random-ass soldier in North Africa, and you're like, man, at the same time, there's people in Europe, there's shit happening in Asia, man. There's so many people involved in this conflict.
To support a direct invasion of Western Europe. There was also the concern that little preparation work would have been made ahead of such an invasion.
Much more
such
World
as
War than World War
building
One.
up
Yeah,
the
I mean, this
supply
was a
chain,
real World War,
gathering
man. Almost
intelligence
everyone
on
was
German
involved.
defenses, the training
Thank you,
of
Vito.
an invasion
Thank
force
you,
for
man.
the task at hand,
Ginger.
the weakening
How
of
is it
German
going?
defenses in the build-up to the invasion, and the disruption to the great German war machine through a sustained air campaign. As such, to Stalin's
This
dismay,
makes me wanna play
he
HOI4
was
Germany,
told
man.
that the invasion of Western Europe was to be postponed until 1943.
Is that Lenin next to him?
However,
Who's the guy on the left?
Churchill had a promise to keep. A deal had been made with Stalin that troops would be landed in Europe in 1942. And so Churchill authorized a large-scale raid on the French...
Oh, they had planned an earlier D-Day? The Dieppe raid. This is 2 years before D-Day. Green Beach, South Saskatchewan Regiment, and the Highlanders. They even know where the radar stations are. Look how far a heavy battery can shoot. Like, that must be kilometers. They planned something before? They would have probably got wrecked, man, without the Americans.
French town of Dieppe.
Lenin died in 1923. There you go.
To take place in August of 1942. While nowhere near the scale of a full-blown invasion,
it's like you play HOI4 and you really quickly want to invade someone because everybody in Discord screams, "You need to invade, we're fucking losing the game, man!"
The raid was intended to remind the Germans that the Western Front had not ended, and would hopefully draw German troops away from the Soviet front, where at this time they were still advancing towards Moscow. Conducted primarily by Canadian troops, the move would prove...
That guy looks like any university hipster nowadays.
A disaster. Dubbed Operation Jubilee, the 10,500-strong force was put ashore with instructions to capture the nearby ports,
like
demolish German defences, and acquire as much intelligence on German operations as possible.
But they learned a lot from the Dieppe raid?
Yet, despite landing tanks and with heavy air and naval support, within just 6 hours of the operation commencing, the survivors were in full retreat.
It's so crazy that my whole life is based on World War II. Like, I'm a World War II streamer, you can say. I never heard of this. I never heard of this raid, bro. This is the first time I've ever heard about this.
1,500 Allied soldiers were killed, and many more captured.
Jeez, what a
Allied
fail.
air forces suffered at the hands of a skilled German air force, while the Royal Navy lost a destroyer supporting the landings and a number of landing craft. For those with the gung-ho attitude of "let's just go," it was a sobering and deeply painful lesson.
Yeah, man, in a real war, you can't just be a rush motherfucker. You can't do that shit.
Might cost.
That's why one thing I never really understood about the military and warfare is, how do shock troops work? One thing I never understand is, how do shock troops work? Look, just recently I learned what that is from Warhammer. A shock troop is a troop that wants to get very close to an enemy and like shock them and surprise them and make them scared. But I never understood that. Like, first of all, you have to get close, which seems so hard to do. And if your enemy isn't shocked and also has like an MG or something, you're really in trouble. Also, imagine you're part of a shock troop, man. Your chance of dying must be so high.
Missing the idea of an invasion of Europe was of course totally unthinkable. Meanwhile, in North Africa, British Commonwealth forces under the command of the charismatic Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery had succeeded in stalling German Field Marshal Rommel's forces at El Alamein. And with US forces landing in Tunisia in Operation Torch, the Germans and Italians were slowly being crushed from all sides. With a direct assault on France deemed impractical until 1944, attention instead turned to invading
Shock troops
Italy
are meant to have a
and
lot of casualties.
storming
Damn,
north
I don't want to be in a
toward
shock troop
Nazi
division,
Germany,
man.
via what Churchill described as Europe's soft underbelly. Having expelled Rommel from Africa on June 9th, 1943, Allied forces invaded Sicily, and then Italy proper in September.
Dude, these are real pictures, man. Isn't that unimaginable, bro? It's crazy. This shit fucking happened, man.
Sought to overthrow fascist dictator Benito Mussolini and come over to the Allied side. This initially sped up the Allied advance through southern Italy, but it became...
The whole idea of a shock trooper is to hit hard and fast and take the enemy by surprise. It's part of the reason the US Marine Corps is reorganizing. It's like a vanguard soldiers, but shock soldiers have to deal huge damage to enemy morale.
Bogged down again, thanks to well-entrenched German and pro-fascist Italian troops. With German resources now committed...
How was so many Germans, though? There were so many Germans. There were in North Africa and Italy and North France, in Russia. Dude, we had like how many inhabitants back then? 60 million? Where are all these Germans from? Jesus.
And having to occupy their captured lands with Allied forces now better prepared, attention began to turn back towards preparation for an invasion of Western Europe.
All this footage, man, these journalists or whatever you call them, that were around with cameras and literal filming cameras, man, they were so important if you think about it, man. These guys have secured footage for us to watch for hundreds of years. Very important, man. Some Germans were coming from the US because Hitler called them. It was actually up to 80 million Germans. In 45, like 40, we already had 80 million Germans? What? How many inhabitants did Germany have prior to World War II? 60 million, I would think. If you're asking what the population was in areas controlled by the Nazis in 1939, the consensus is actually 80 million. Wow! The German population hasn't changed. I mean, it was bigger back then with Prussia, but Germany still has 80 million. Wow. So stagnant. Not lower, not higher. Interesting.
In the highest echelons of power. First, who should be in overall command of the operation? And
Holding
second,
the 80 million.
where should the invasion be carried out? In both Britain and the United States, the war had produced military leaders who had become household names and were as such revered by their respective peoples. In Britain, the favourite to lead an assault on Fortress Europe was, of course, Field Marshal Montgomery, fresh off his success in North Africa and Italy. However, with the majority of troops now being American, it was felt to be more fitting that an American should lead the campaign, and in late 1943, that job was given to one General Dwight David Ike.
He won the presidency later, right? In like overwhelming fashion. It's like if you're a war hero, you're gonna win the election, bro.
Eisenhower's selection was not without its controversy.
Like, why wouldn't you vote for him after what he does here,
such
man?
as Montgomery and the US's boisterous General Patton had seen extensive combat in World War I, whereas Eisenhower served the entirety of the war in the United States. While he had overseen the successful Torch and Italian landings, his lack of combat experience would cast a dark shadow over many of his decisions in the build-up to June 1944. However, Eisenhower had one crucial skill for the planning and execution of the soon-to-be-named Operation Overlord that no other general seemed to possess. He was a master at getting the various nationalities and the personalities of their leaders to unify into a single force.
I mean, what a human being in history, right? What a man. Like, he will echo in the eternity, man. That's I'm always interested in special humans that are just so much more special than everyone else. And Dwight D. Eisenhower, man, what he achieved there, what he did there is one of the most epic things a human being could have ever done, man.
It was thanks to Eisenhower that D-Day was not 3 separate operations carried out by the United States, United Kingdom and Canada, but one all-encompassing invasion.
That picture is the background in Hearts of Iron 4.
Force, intent on liberating Europe.
What a crazy picture, man. Imagine you, or the guy that took that picture. I know I'm sounding so romantic lately and stuff, but dude, what a picture, man. What a picture. Wow.
From Hitler's tyranny. As for where this invasion would take place, it was universally agreed that the ideal location to invade Fortress Europe would be at the Pas-de-Calais. This was where the English Channel was at its most narrow, allowing for a shorter crossing, decreasing the time the invasion force was most vulnerable. It also afforded them maximum air cover from bases in southeast England, but the problem, of course, was that the Germans knew this too. As such, they had deployed some of their best troops, the German 15th Army under General von Samuth, who were afforded some of the best German equipment and strongest fortifications to hold off an invasion force. Hitting Calais, even successfully, would result in a bloodbath, slowing any advance into mainland Europe until replacements could be sourced. I
have a letter from my grandfather. He got that from the Normandy invasion. It has Eisenhower's signature on it. I want to see a picture, man. Make a picture. Send me that. I watched something very interesting on YouTube lately. It was about why so many Nazis had scars on their face. Oh, I know that. It's from, I saw it on Joe Rogan podcast. They would do fencing at university, and they wanted to get hurt. This still kind of exists nowadays. They wanted to get cut, and then they put horsehair in these cuts so they become more scarry. That's why for the Nazis it was a sign of power to have a big scar on your face, and they will literally put it on themselves and stuff.
As Chief of Staff to the Supreme Allied Commander, a role abbreviated to the much less of a mouthful Cossack, it was down to British Army Lieutenant General Frederick E. Morgan to recommend an alternative. In a meeting with Allied leaders in Quebec, Canada, in May of 1943,
look at Churchill, that fucking Chad,
he gave
dude.
his recommendation after tirelessly examining all the options available based on enemy disposition and the units and equipment that would be available to the Allies for the invasion. Quote, I have come to...
I literally sent you the picture? How quickly did you just send me that picture, man? That was so fast. Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Forces, blah, 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 blah. That looks so fake, doesn't it? Reverse image search that? I can't download the picture. I don't know, bro. I don't know. If it's true, that's pretty sick, man.
The conclusion that, in view of the limitations in resources imposed by my directives, we may be assured of a reasonable
Those were never
chance
sent to any
of
troops?
On the
The
1st
signature
of
also
May,
looked so fake.
1944, if we
He keeps it in her
concentrate
pockets
our
at all
efforts
times.
on an assault across the Norman beaches. It was, therefore, decided, when the Allies were ready and a date set, a day that would become
It's not
known
fake,
as
but your opinion, I
D-Day,
guess. I mean,
the Allied
if it's
forces
real,
would
cool, man, cool.
invade
D Defending the Führer's European prize.
Germany's extraordinary success in 1940, which led to the fall of Western Europe under the German jackboot, was now a source of great concern for Hitler. For on the defensive, it presented him with an enormous coastline,
Yeah, that's just
stretching
too much
from
to
the
handle,
north
dude.
of Spain up
He
into
overstretched, man.
Scandinavia, from which his forces now had to defend against an Allied invasion. Perhaps conscious of the fact that his own forces had been successful against France by simply going around the seemingly impenetrable Maginot Line in 1940, he outlined a strategy of building powerful fortifications, supported by military and
Just
aircraft
put tanks on all
as
the ports.
far as was possible along this coastline, to prevent allies from breaching Fortress Europe. This also allowed him to keep as many of his troops as he could on the Eastern Front and in Italy, where, on both counts...
Why did they
the
ever think it was
retreat
clever to have
planned in
West, Eastern, and
1944,
Southern Front, man?
dubbed the
The
Atlantic
point is really
War,
that at that point
the
they
Germans
thought we're
built
so
vast
successful, we're
numbers
so
of
unbeatable, we're
concrete
gonna easily
bunkers
crush
along
Russia.
4
And if you actually see what happened in Russia, right? We have seen documentaries here on the channel. How utterly Germany destroyed Russia in the beginning of the war. Obviously they would have thought, oh, this is easy, man. Easy mode, bro. Haha, but then...
1,000 miles of coastline,
It started
broken
snowing,
apart
huh?
by natural
Alter, look at these
obstacles,
guns.
man-made ones,
Jesus.
and numerous minefields. The Dieppe raid and numerous smaller operations conducted by British commandos only heightened Hitler's fears that he was exposed to invasion from the west, and he ordered the wall be given high priority. Yet, compared to other fronts, the troops based on the wall had a relatively quiet time between 1941
Wow, look at that, man.
and
Railing gun.
1944. However, even with troops...
Yeah, for 3 years you were just hanging out, man, banging French girls, and then you get utterly shit on by Tom Hanks.
from occupied countries filling their ranks, the Germans did not have enough men to defend the entire wall equally. In August of 1943, a new commander arrived on the Atlantic Wall that gave the Allies cause for concern. Field Marshal Rommel, the Desert Fox himself, arrived to oversee the construction of defenses and formulate a plan of action with which to repel an Allied invasion. Despite
sounds much
his
better than
Africa
Eastern Front,
Corps
though. Yeah,
having
yeah,
been
yeah.
repelled
It was
from
probably
North
pretty good to
Africa,
be in the West.
He was still highly respected as a competent military leader in Allied circles. Construction of the Atlantic Wall
Look at all these videos, I never even knew we had this much footage. This is crazy.
had, before Rommel's arrival, ground down to an apathetic effort by the German officers. However, the field marshal's influence was immediately felt by his subordinates, who suddenly found themselves with vastly increased workloads. But as well as having to contend with resistance below him, Rommel was also contending with his increasing unpopularity with the German high command. Some saw him as a failure following the defeat in North Africa, while others viewed him as a rival for influence with Hitler, while others still simply didn't like him.
I
In
just don't like
outlining
him.
his plan to rebel an Allied invasion, Rommel requested that German tank forces, spearheaded by infantry, be held close to the coastline to respond quickly to any Allied landings. Such powerful tank forces could devastate the infantry trying to wade ashore, and prevent the establishment of an Allied beachhead from where fresh troops and tanks could be deployed. However, both Hitler and the German Commander-in-Chief, Field Marshal Gerhard von Rundstedt, were opposed to Rommel's request. They instead adopted the policy of grouping their tank forces together away from the coastline, so once the main Allied assault came, which they were still convinced would ultimately be from Calais, the panzers could be thrust against it and drive the Allies back into the sea. Nevertheless,
We all learned in HOI4, putting your tanks on the shore, on the port, is much, much stronger.
Rommel remained committed to his duty to defend Germany's French prize as best he could. As well as the bunker construction effort, he also instigated an immense mining operation in and around the French coastline,
At least I didn't
and
rule break.
impressed upon his subordinates.
Look at the quality of
importance
this
their
picture,
work.
man. So good.
Less than 2 months before D-Day,
Bro, we can't get footage from Epstein's cell, but 1944 we have pictures like this. Isn't that crazy?
in April of 1944, he was inspecting one of countless French beaches he was tasked with defending, when he outlined to his adjutant, Captain Helmuth Lang, his view of the overall situation Germany found itself in at the time. Quote, "The war will be won or lost on the beaches. We'll only have one chance to stop the enemy, and that's while he's in the water. Believe me, Lang, The first 24
Thank you,
hours
Sab,
of the
man. What's up,
invasion
dude?
will be decisive for the Allies as
Do you
well
really
as
think
Germany.
Epstein killed himself?
It will
Shut
be
the fuck up, you
longest
retard.
day. While Rommel was inspecting his defences, the Allied commanders decided to test their equipment and readiness for a major seaborne invasion and initiated Operation Tiger. 23,000 American troops were assembled with their equipment before boarding troop ships in British harbours, which then circled around the south of England to launch a mock invasion of the beaches along the Devonshire coast that had been dressed up to resemble the Atlantic Wall fortifications. To add to the realism, the beaches were heavily shelled by American and British warships, both to understand how their equipment, such as tanks, would function on beaches riddled with craters, and to help get the American troops comfortable with riding in landing craft towards a beach with live shells going over their heads. Witnessed by Eisenhower himself, the invasion of Devon began on April 27th.
I've never heard of this. My entire life I cared about World War II. I've never heard of this shit before.
And was wrought with problems. Due to miscommunication, a group of American landing craft made it to the beach at Slapton Sands, while the Royal Navy was still shelling the area, resulting in several American casualties.
Oh
With the
shit.
shelling-
Miss, your son died in the war. He died a hero. Oh no! How did he die? The Canadians. The Royal Navy, I mean. They fucked them up. The Royal Navy! I thought they're on our side. God damn. What a shit way to die in a war, man. Sus boat. Right
Stopped.
there.
The rest of the initial force made their landing,
Ah,
with
shit,
a second
man.
invasion planned for the next day.
Imagine you meet a kid nowadays. My great grandpa was a war hero, was part of D-Day. Oh wow, what happened? Was he at Ma Beach? No, he got shot by the Royal Navy.
However, during the night
What
of
kind of medal
April
do you get for that, man? The
27th
friendly
and
fire medal?
28th, the remainder of the mock invasion
Survived
force
up to
still at sea
1944 just to
were
die
cruising
to
through
England.
Lyme Bay when they were
Fuck,
spotted
man.
by a group of marauding German E-boats.
E-boats?
British warships
Elon Musk?
protecting the exercise had already
Look at
detected
that.
the E-boats and were moving to intercept, but were unable to warn the American troop ships because they weren't provided with the American radio frequencies. At around 130 hours on
Wow.
April 28th, the E-boats
Look at these
attacked with
pictures.
torpedoes and 40mm guns. In the chaos and carnage that followed, 749 Americans were killed. 2 troop ships were sunk.
I never heard
and a
about
third
this.
was badly damaged.
Wow.
Tragically, many of those who drowned did
Whoa,
so only
look at that
because they had not
footage.
received proper training in the use of life jackets. Like Dieppe,
they did
Operation
not use
Tiger
life
was a
jackets, I
sobering
thought?
reminder that any invasion of
The
Fortress
footage.
Europe was
I'm
going
so
to be
impressed by the
difficult
footage they
and
have.
costly, if not properly prepared for. The fact that such a disaster could happen off the English coastline without the German E-boats having any support from shore gunners or aircraft
1,000
only
casualties in the
highlighted
rehearsal.
the dangers of transporting such huge numbers of men by sea. In fact, Tiger almost scuppered D-Day in 1944 altogether. This was because several officers, who are now listed as missing in the weeks after the tragedy, had knowledge of the upcoming invasion of Normandy, and the fear was that they had been picked up
Oh, they
by the
thought that they
E-boats
will
and then
tell the
broken
Germans.
under German interrogation. These worries were eventually dismissed. D-Day would continue as planned.
I have a funny story. It's not funny. Do you want to know where I live now? I'm going to dox myself. I was walking around with the baby, and I'm living close to a park, and there's a street, and the street is called some American name. And under the sign, it says, right here in this house was the last casualty of World War II, some American guy. And he got shot here. It's literally around the corner. And I wanted to show you that, but when I googled, it's not true. The picture of the last man to die. The picture of the last man to die is a black and white photograph taken by Robert Capa during the battle for Leipzig, representing an American soldier, Raymond J. Bowman. It's the Raymond Bowman Street. I'm living close to that. He was 21 years old, and he got killed by a German sniper on 18th of April 1945, shortly before the end of the war. He wasn't the real last casualty, but the picture has been advertised as the last casualty. Just a little side story. I lived very close where the last guy died. German sniper, man. The war was over. Imagine you're the last guy to die in World War II, man. How unlucky can you be?
On
Fuck, man.
ascertaining just what the Germans had placed around the landing zones. Crucially, this had to be done in such a way so as not to alert the Germans as to what was going on. Thus, beginning in April of 1944, the RAF and USAAF began an intensive photo reconnaissance effort aimed at building a full tactical picture of the situation in Normandy and the surrounding regions. Using high-speed fighter aircraft such as the Spitfire, the P-38 Lightning...
You're also unlucky for the first guy who died. Who was the first guy? They don't know that. It must have been a German or Polish guy. First person to die in World War II officially. It's a Polish man. Franciszek Honiok. 31st of August in 1949 was a Polish man who is famous for having been the first official victim of World War II on the evening of 31st of August 1949.
The reconnaissance pilots flew daring, ultra-low-level missions over German positions all along the European coastline. Normandy received no more or less attention than anywhere else. Thus, it was not signaled to German intelligence as a point of
all wars
special
based on
interest.
deception, man.
Flying at such low levels, where trees and power lines were as much a threat as enemy gunners, afforded Allied commanders extremely detailed images of the German defences. Allied reconnaissance pilots' missions were made all the more dangerous by the fact that many of their aircraft lacked guns to defend themselves, to instead have more fuel and greater speed once that fuel had been exhausted. Over 3,200 missions were flown in direct support of Operation Overlord and in conjunction with the French resistance, who highlighted targets of interest for future flights. The resistance also monitored German movements and made estimates on the numbers of troops deployed at the landing zones. Perhaps even more dangerous were the operations carried out by specialized boat crews, who had previously been involved in assisting commando raids. Their job was to sneak up on the French coastline to locate fixed German defenses designed to rupture landing.
It's like a movie. Imagine you and a bunch of dudes in the night. You land in North France and you're like, there's a station there and a bunker there. It's so fucking scary, but also so ballsy and manly.
On approach to the beaches, this would give Allied commanders the maximum information on the landing zones, allowing them to fine-tune their plans. One interesting and less obvious, but ultimately highly important part of the Allied intelligence efforts involved a call put out by the BBC for anyone in Britain who had photographs taken while on holiday in France prior to the outbreak of the war. A staggering 10 million images and descriptions of the French coastline were handed over to the War Office. But just as important as the effort to gather intelligence on enemy positions and defences was the need to feed Germany's own intelligence network with false information. D-Day would provide the impetus for probably the most successful counterintelligence program in history. Dubbed appropriately as Operation Bodyguard, Allied intelligence officers concocted a string of elaborate plans designed to...
That's how you do it, Putin. Vladimir Putin wants to do this too, but all he has is a bunch of young bots on Facebook, bro.
D-Day landings. This would prevent the Germans from being able to maximize their defensive posture around Normandy and delay the arrival of reinforcements, which could see the landings become bogged down on the beaches or even fail altogether. One of the biggest assets, albeit unwitting ones in achieving this goal, were the Germans themselves.
What a weird picture, man. This must be Paris or France. And there's a bunch of officers sitting in a coffee together with French women. And soldiers walk by and salute. What a weird sight, right? How weird is that?
While they had militarily dominated the European continent since 1940, their intelligence agencies were rather lacking compared to the British and American efforts. While coding devices such as the famed Enigma machine initially allowed Germany to communicate with their forces...
Dude, great movie. What is that movie called? Benne Bumba Kumbos Natural? About Alan Turing. What a great movie. It's a movie where they deciphered the Enigma program. Imitation Game. Very good movie. And what a crazy, sad character Alan Turing was, man. What a shame on the British history. And they found out how to decrypt the German messages very nicely in the end by understanding every message the Germans did always ended with Heil Hitler. So they always knew what code is HEIL blah 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 blah, right? So the Germans using Heil Hitler all the time made them be decrypted by made the decryption of the Enigma machine possible.
Without fear of interception, their overconfidence in such devices led to them underestimating the Allies' ability to crack their communications. Which, of course...
These two words reduce the war by units. Isn't that... Again, I always feel like life is like a movie. Adolf Hitler wanted you to hail him. He wanted you to say Heil Hitler to him. But these two words fucked them so hard, man. Isn't that insane? Like, sometimes you think life is a book written by God or some shit. What a
Even
story,
using
man.
primitive computers to do so, as well as learning the disposition of German forces along the Atlantic Wall. Breaking the German codes allowed the Allies a glimpse into the mindset of the German High Command surrounding the defense of occupied France. It also allowed them to gauge the effectiveness of their misinformation efforts, so as to better tailor future ones to make them more effective at making the Germans think the invasion of Europe was coming from anywhere other than Normandy. A situation aided by the fact that Hitler himself was convinced that any invasion crossing the Channel would arrive in Calais. Under the umbrella of Bodyguard, Operation...
Oh, fake tanks. Dude, they were so intelligent. The stuff they did, the counterintelligence, the memeing, the fake tanks. So... Dude, I genuinely mean this. When you read Sun Tzu's Art of War, the #1 quote from that book is, all war is based on deception, man. Deception is everything.
Fortitude
And they did that
sought to
so well.
fuel Hitler's belief by creating a false picture of Allied armies amassing in England and Scotland that, to German intelligence, made it appear as though the Allies were intent in landing in Calais and Norway. Planned by British Army Colonel Noel Wild, the operation called for the creation of dummy trucks, tanks, aircraft, and even units, which could be photographed by high-flying German reconnaissance aircraft. In photographs taken from such high altitude, it would be impossible to tell the difference between the real equipment for Normandy and the fake ones for Fortitude. In fact, some of the equipment looked so real that even people on the ground mistook them for genuine. But Fortitude went beyond building replica tanks. Fortitude also involved fake radio broadcasts intended for the Germans to intercept.
Imagine your job is to just do fake broadcasts all day, man.
The Allies were trying
it's like
to
you're
build
nowadays a
with
Russian
their
streamer or
dummy
some
army.
shit.
A number of secret agents were also employed to drip feed the Germans information, but perhaps the most direct method employed was the decision that, for every 2 radar stations Allied air forces attacked around Normandy leading up to D-Day, 2 more in the surrounding areas should be attacked even if they would have little impact on the actual landings. This would only further confuse the German picture and help keep them convinced that Normandy was a decoy operation for Calais. By the time of D-Day itself, German intelligence was still convinced that as many as 10 divisions were waiting to storm Calais, even when the numbers of Allies in Normandy were entering the hundreds of thousands. But Fortitude's work didn't stop on D-Day. Instead, it continued its efforts to deceive the Germans that Normandy was a decoy, if only to delay the redeployment of German forces for as long as possible. Under Operation Bodyguard, similar deception campaigns were undertaken that the invasion was actually intended for more southern regions of France, the Balkans, or even neutral Sweden. The eventual success of D-Day can, in no small part, be attributed to this elaborate and highly...
What a complex operation, man. So highly complex, involving thousands of bright minds.
Planning for the D-Day invasion never stopped, as the intelligence picture constantly changed, but overall, objectives remained the same. An airborne element would go in first.
Yo, that is straight up the bridge from Call of Duty 1. If you ever play Call of Duty 1 or see my Call of Duty 1 stream, this is the bridge where the British had to hold it for a while. Pegasus Bridge. It's even a mission in Steel Division. It's even a Steel Division bridge, yeah.
Such as bridges, and to destroy artillery positions that would
ultra important bridge.
The main force would then storm 5 beaches, each with their own code words. American beaches were Omaha and Utah. British beaches were Sword and Gold. The sole Canadian beach was Juno. However, this is not to say that these beaches were assaulted exclusively by their designated nations. Far from it. There were a number of specialized personnel, ready and waiting to be transferred from one nation's beach to another if they were needed. Additionally, on the ground, in the air, and at sea, there were those who had escaped their own countries before they fell to the Nazi onslaught, and were now eager to start taking their land back.
Yeah, the resistance was probably really ready. You have to arm them, though, somehow.
As June arrived, Eisenhower set the historic date for the invasion of Normandy as June 5th, 1944. At 20 harbours in the UK, men and equipment were being crammed on...
Imagine what that must feel like. Imagine you're one of these dudes. and you're going to fucking war on the beaches, man. You're probably shitting your pants or you're really fucking eager. You're like, fuck yeah, let's go.
Troop ships ready to head out to their rendezvous point.
Even though I think that a group of men hypes each other up. I think that you see that in West Nichts Neues, the German war movie that's now nominated for an Oscar. I think men hype each other up, man. You're like in this group and there's this vibe and dynamic and you feel like, yeah, we're gonna fucking kill Hitler, man. But then the first bullet goes into the head of your friend. You're like, oh shit, okay, so this is war.
Southeast of the Isle of Wight, with special attention having been given to their protection following the disaster of Operation Tiger.
I mean, how many Americans died, man? 250,000? That's a lot of dead people, bro.
Yet despite the secrecy
that's still double what the Russians
it was
lost so far
to conceal from the Germans the vast movement of ships from British ports, leading to the Germans conducting an attack using gun and torpedo boats. This attack was repelled by overpowering Allied warships, but the threat of further assaults remained. With the Allies now having extensive experience in amphibious assault operations, much of the equipment seemed tailor-made for storming the beaches of Normandy.
Actually, 400,000 American
WW2,
deaths.
For example,
I always
was
thought 250.
essentially an amphibious truck, which could not only bring supplies to the beach, but crucially, drive them straight to where they would be needed. They could also be fitted with various heavy weapons, although, being unarmored, they were not ideal fighting vehicles. One vehicle that was, however, was the British Churchill AVR.
Thank you.
Meaning
are you doing cardio? What a dumb
Royal
question right now. We're
Engineer.
watching your fucking...
This
Shut
was
up,
a basic
idiot.
Churchill tank chassis,
Churchill.
with its main gun replaced by a petard spigot mortar, which fired a devastating 40-pound bomb known as a flying dustbin.
Where's that in Steel Division, huh?
AVRE was adept at destroying the tough fortifications expected on the Normandy beaches. The basic Churchill itself also having excellent performance in climbing obstacles. The AVRE was one of a number of so-called funnies, tanks modified for specific purposes in support of the landings. Other funnies included the Swimming Sherman, also known as the DD or Donald Duck tank. This was a Sherman tank with a canvas flotation screen and propellers to power it through the water. Unlike tanks designed from the start to be amphibious, which often had to sacrifice armor or firepower for buoyancy, once the Swimming Sherman was on the beach, it could ditch the flotation screen and it was just another M4 Sherman. The Swimming Sherman was so successful, it was used on all 5 beaches at Normandy. Not forgetting
not so good in Steel
Rommel's
Division, though.
insistence
That's for
on
sure.
mining the beaches. Both the Churchill and Sherman also had mine-clearing variants, such as the Crab. The Crab was a Sherman tank, fitted with a roller that spun heavy chains into the ground to detonate the mines safely away from the tank. Fearing that armored vehicles may get bogged down on the wet, sandy beaches, variants of the Churchill were fitted with a roller to lay reinforced matting down, thus creating a surface on which they could drive.
This shit is so deep and so intelligent, and there's so many things you have to look at before you invade someone.
By its crews as the carpet layer. One invention that was designed.
I know the Avery is in Steel Division 2. I was just saying, why is it so shit in Steel Division 2?
Specifically,
any German tank just shoots you
was
instantly.
The Mulberry Harbour system, the purpose of which was to ease and speed up the unloading process so that Allied troops were supplied as they advanced across France, after eventually breaking out from Normandy. The Mulberry Harbours would be towed out to Normandy and assembled like a vast jigsaw
That's a floating
puzzle
harbour
at
in
Omaha
in
and Gold
HOI4.
Beach. As more and more men embarked on their ships to the rendezvous point, nerves among the Allies were understandably beginning to fray. A growing cause for concern was the seemingly worsening weather, the one factor that neither the Allies nor the Germans had any control over. Clear skies were needed for the full moon to help with the navigation during airborne operations, while the need for calm water in the seaborne phase was obvious. With so much resting on the weather conditions being just right for an airborne and seaborne invasion of Normandy, Eisenhower called a meeting of some of his most senior...
Something that I would like to see better in Hearts of Iron 5 If you're honest, when you play Hearts of Iron, you don't give a fuck about the weather. There is a weather system, there's thunderstorms and stuff, but no one fucking cares. You take your air, you put it on a target, and then you never look at the air again. No one cares about weather. Maybe something they could improve for Hearts of Iron one day, that you actually have to care about weather a bit more.
Senior officers at Southwick House at 415 hours on the morning of June 4th to discuss the situation and whether it may be necessary to delay the invasion. Ultimately, the decision on whether or not to launch the invasion on June 5th rested solely on his shoulders, but he would be making that decision based on the predictions of a lanky RAF officer by the name of Group Captain James Stagg. Stagg was Operation Overlord's chief meteorological officer, and it was his role to interpret the information that was coming in from weather stations, observation posts, and even combat aircraft flying weather patrols across the
interesting
British
role.
Isles. And it was not good news. Stagg, being a non-combat officer and holding a rank equivalent to that of a colonel in the army, had the unenviable task of telling a room full of some of the most important leaders of the Allied war effort that in his opinion, the invasion should be delayed by 24 hours to allow the weather to improve. Many of those in attendance, such as Field Marshal Montgomery, scoffed at the suggestion and insisted they go as
Tell me
planned
your
on
old
the
fat
5th.
ass couldn't even get off the boat?
They knew
Bruh,
they
I
only
choke
had
you
a
out in 2 seconds,
3-day
mate.
window
What are you
for the
talking
moon
about?
to be in the
I probably
right
can run
phase,
faster than you, still.
and delays could see the forced postponement of the operation for weeks. Worse still for Stagg's case, American meteorologists using a different prediction system believed that a high-pressure front was going to force the bad weather away from the landing zones, leaving them with clear skies on June 5th. But Stagg remained adamant in his
I want to see
recommendation.
Bannerlord Waters again. Me
to
too.
hold
I want to
off
watch with Lisa
for
one day.
24 hours.
But
After listening-
me and Lisa are so busy. Every day we watch like 20 minutes of Last of Us. After that, the baby has to go to sleep.
To Stagg's case,
But episode 3 is pretty good, man, with the prepper.
reluctantly
Very
agreed,
nice.
and he gave the order that the invasion was to be postponed until June 6th. Stagg would be proven correct when, on the night of June
Mr.
4th and
Stagg.
the morning of June 5th, the landing zones were lashed with terrible weather.
Mr. Stagg MVP,
Finally,
bro.
as the weather began to
Make him an
improve on
Is Mr. Stagg an advisor in HOI4? He should be an advisor. Minus 10% air accident chance or something.
June 5th, 1944, what had been the original date for D-Day, the preparation phase began. Minesweepers snuck up to the Normandy coast to begin their work clearing a path for the troop ships, while a massive force of over 1,200 combat aircraft began softening up defences. Through the night and then into D-Day itself, the weakened Luftwaffe would be outnumbered in the air by almost 10 to 1.
10 to
allowing
1,
the Allies to
wow.
effectively control the skies,
Get fucked.
allowing them to conduct close air support missions.
I always wondered,
Rapid-firing
just
aircraft
objectively,
like
what
the
will
British Typhoon
the D-Day have
would
looked like if
become
there was no
heavily
Russia war?
engaged in clearing away fortifications and destroying tanks. As the
Imagine
Allied
saving
troops
hundreds of lives with a
realized
small
that
decision,
this
maybe
was
thousands of
it,
lives, right?
they
Yeah,
reminded
that's a lot of green
themselves
air.
of Eisenhower's words.
That's some big
Quote,
green air.
"Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle hardened. He will fight savagely. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty,
Yeah, these Germans
and
were scary,
skill in
man.
battle. We will accept
very
nothing
trained
less
and ready
than full
To
victory.
eat some pounds of
Good
chocolate.
luck, and let all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking." Meanwhile, far from the commotion at countless
This is Berchtesgaden. I did vacation there. Down here is Königssee. This is beautiful. When I went to this area in real life last year, I said to Lisa, I know why Hitler was here so much. It is beautiful there. I don't want to like praise Hitler, but if you ever come to Europe, Germany, Austria, go to where Hitler was chilling. It's fucking heaven on earth, man.
airfields in the UK and aboard the vast fleets of ships in the English Channel. At his residence high in the Bavarian Alps, the Führer Adolf Hitler settled in for a relatively peaceful evening at the so-called Wolf's Lair. He and his entourage.
Yeah, I've seen that one, but it's being restored right now. You can't go there. It was a year ago, but normally you can go up there. It's like a museum or some shit, but at the moment they're restoring it.
Private cinema before retreating into the lounge area, where Hitler lectured them on his thoughts of the day, be they of war, politics, or his views on the great men of history. Looking back on that evening, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels said before his death that the evening of June 5th, 1944 was like what he called the good old times, as the Nazi regime was on the rise to its...
This was probably the peak. You will literally say that. The evening of the 5th of June was probably the Nazi peak, where also Hitler and everybody felt the best. They were like, bro, we're fucking doing great here. And then the next day is just straight up downwards,
Ultimate
man.
power. Goebbels retired to bed earlier than Hitler, who had been having trouble sleeping, and it wasn't until 3 a.m. that the Fuhrer finally went to bed. Sleep coming courtesy of medication. Something big was getting underway across the channel, but fearful of Hitler's temper, his aides decided not to inform him until they had more information. And thus, as Hitler
That's the weakness of
drifted
dictators,
off into a
man.
medically aided sleep, he was unaware that a vast armada of aircraft carrying paratroopers
The Hitler slept,
were already cruising
and he got
into
fucked
Normandy.
in the West.
Unaware that the dreams of a 1,000-year Reich were about to be shattered.
The Germans still fading from
Unaware
Goebbels'
that
propaganda.
history was tying a noose around his neck.
Now let's get to the day. Operation Overlord. Airborne.
As the final minutes of June 5th ticked away, at bases across England, an air armada, unlike anything history had ever seen before, was beginning to mobilize and lift off into the night.
How
The
many
large
parachutes did not
majority
work that
of
night,
the
man?
aircraft carrying
Probably more than you
paratroopers
think.
into Normandy were Douglas C-4 Skytrains, more commonly known by their British designation, Dakota. The C-47 is one of history's truly great aircraft, a military variant of the DC-3 airliner, an aircraft credited with making air travel practical. American and British C-47s would eventually drop some 50,000 paratroopers into Normandy. They would also provide a vital logistical
Kind of like warm up. How about you warm up some table tennis, Dankus? Because you fucking suck.
Could be captured and secured for them to land. Their rugged design making them ideal for getting in and out of ex-Luftwaffe bases. However, it was a dangerous task, even with the softening up of
Won the last game? What happened before that, Dankus? Tell the
aircraft
chat.
were
Tell the chat.
relatively slow, and when it came to deploying the paratroopers, they had to descend around 600 feet, where they were exposed to all manner of anti-aircraft fire. Upon leaping from the aircraft, a static line automatically deployed.
You know what we really need, man? Another World War II single-player game. Like a Call of Duty World War I. It's not gonna happen because nowadays it's all about loot boxes and the Battle Royale, but a good old new age graphic Call of Duty World War II game, man. You know, and you play all these campaigns and shit.
Parachutes, but if the shoot failed,
A nice
or
multiplayer.
became tangled up, the paratrooper would
God, I
need
just love Call of Duty 1, man. One of the best
seconds to
games
release
ever.
his emergency parachute, but with less time to slow his descent, this would
Like Company
almost
Heroes 3? I'm
certainly
playing a lot
result
of
in
Company Heroes
harder
3. I'm now
landing,
officially sponsored
which
by
could
Company
lead
Heroes
to
3.
a broken leg or ankle. If all went
We're
well,
gonna stream a
however,
lot of
the
Company Heroes 3,
paratroopers
man.
typically took 35 seconds to descend from their aircraft, during which time they would feel extraordinarily exposed to keen-eyed German snipers, making out their silhouettes
World War II
against
season
the
pass.
night sky behind them. To help draw enemy fire, hundreds of paradummies, known as
Oh, I never heard
Ruperts and
about that.
Oscars to the British and Americans respectively, were
So many
dropped.
dummies, which is
In
so
the
clever.
darkness, these could not be distinguished from real paratroopers. Parachuting into Normandy that night were elements of the US 82nd and 101st Airborne
101st Airborne Division,
who
hoorah!
were assigned various objectives on the Cotentin Peninsula.
The fucking shit
west
these
of
guys
the
went
US
through, man.
beach designated as Utah. However, all did not go according to plan, as the aircraft took heavy fire during their approach to the drop zones, and many were lost.
I really want to
before
watch Band of Brothers
and
right now.
after their troops had disembarked.
Yeah.
First Lieutenant Robert P. Matthews of the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment from the 82nd would attain the tragic accolade of being the first American to be killed on D-Day when the C-47 he was aboard was hit by anti-aircraft fire, mortally wounding him before he had a chance to jump. with
F
his
in the
men.
chat, man.
In
F in the
chaos,
chat.
many paratroopers
Poor
missed
guy,
the
man.
drop
Couldn't
zones
even
often
jump.
by miles,
Fuck, man.
and the units that were landed were often in
The
disarray.
world is a grim place,
Despite
man.
these setbacks, the paratroopers fought fiercely against German forces behind the beaches at Normandy, destroying artillery guns, disrupting supply routes, and diverting German attention away from the landings. However, not all the members of the airborne units deployed that night went in under the canopies of parachutes. Many went in via gliders that would be towed to release points near their targets and then piloted down in what was effectively a controlled crash.
What the
Gliders
fuck?
had the advantage of being able to carry larger
Ah,
equipment
this
for
is
the
so
airborne
interesting,
troops,
bro.
but they came with a host of their own dangers too. They were just as vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire as their powered counterparts, and landing them safely was often a tricky undertaking that, if you got it wrong, could see as many troopers killed or injured before they even had a chance to fight. The
It's like a
British
modern-day
air-speed
helicopter?
Horsa was capable of
Sorry, I need to close
transporting
my window.
up
Don't
to
look at my
30
dick.
fully equipped troops, or various light vehicles and field guns. Yet, despite its size and the lack of a power plant, it was a surprisingly agile aircraft in flight, given that it was highly unlikely that any significant number would survive their first flight into battle.
God, I want to
The
play Hell
Horsa
Loose
was
right now.
manufactured
Fuck.
using wood, which helped alleviate the strain on the supply chain for strategic metals.
Hell Loose is one of these
Hammer
games
was
you want to
another
play,
large
but once you're in it, you
designed
think, wow, this is the
primarily
worst
to
game
carry
ever.
light tanks, 17-pounder field guns, or large numbers of supplies in a single flight. While an American design, it was fielded solely by the British and was designed around specifications outlined by Winston Churchill himself in 1941.
It's a fun game until you get sniped
It was,
5 times out
however,
of
the
nowhere.
WW2
Exactly.
CG4 that was the most numerically significant glider of the war. The CG4, known as the Hadrian in British service, was smaller than the Horsa, only being able to carry either 13 combat-ready troops with equipment.
Real war
a
is so
single
much about
jeep,
equipment,
or a
and it took me years to understand that.
75mm
As a
howitzer.
gamer, I
Its
always just played World
smaller
War II
size
games
gave
just
it the
because I want to
advantage of
shoot
being
people, I
able
want to
land in
strategically
tighter areas,
surround people.
thus
I never cared about
greatly
equipment. It's
expanding
just that
the
Hearts of Iron
number
4 kind of
of
brought into my
potential
life.
landing sites.
And Steel Division.
Featuring a
It's all about
well-built
equipment.
tubular
What kind of
fuselage
equipment
with
you use?
canvas
What
covering
pierces
the
what?
wings,
What's better than
skinned in
this, you
thin
know?
plywood. The
What
CG4
fighter has more
also
agility
had
and
other
shit? Thank you,
advantages.
Kekmo.
The payload area, for example, was made more easily accessible.
When I was younger, I never really
nose
cared
and
about
cockpits being
equipment
mounted
types
on
and
a
shit.
hinge,
I just wanted to,
allowing
oh,
it
it's a
to
tank,
swing
let's
upwards,
go.
exposing the
The
whole
tank is a tank,
cargo
right?
area.
That's what I was
Because
thinking.
of the often violent nature
It's like
of
modern rock,
glider
paper, scissors,
landings,
yeah.
a safety cable was also fitted, designed to attach to any vehicle being carried inside the cargo area. Should the vehicle break free when the glider hit the ground and slide forward
Look at this
towards
French
the
guy.
cockpit,
He's just
the
like, oh la
cable
la, I
would
will
lift
help
the
you.
hinged
Don't worry, I
cockpit
live
upwards
right
to
next
the
door.
unloading position, thus saving the pilots from being run over by their own cargo. The British 6th Airborne Division made extensive use of gliders in capturing the bridges over the River Orne and the Caen Canal. Taking the bridges relatively quickly, they then had to dig in and fight tooth and nail to keep them until reinforcements could arrive.
Okay, here we go, man. Here we go. Omaha Beach, bro.
Of all the beaches
Steven
on
Spielberg.
D-Day, the 10-mile stretch designated as Omaha was by far the most heavily defended, and thus the beach was hit by a force of heavy bombers prior to the landing taking place. However, the bombers had to contend with thick
so
clouds
many
blanketing
bombs,
the
bro.
area, and so they had to effectively bomb blind. Concerned their weapons might stray out to sea and hit the Allied armada, the crews proved too cautious in their aiming, and many of the bombs missed their targets, falling instead inland.
Look at that picture, man. Wow. You know, nowadays our brains are so oversaturated, man. You look at a picture like this and feel nothing anymore. But take a second and look at this picture, man. And that's happening right now in East Ukraine. Even worse,
On
man.
the French countryside. A particularly concerning obstacle for both US
looks like
beaches
Donetsk.
was a gun battery located at Pointe du Hoc, a 100-foot tall cliff that provided a wide arc of fire over the surrounding areas, including the beaches where thousands of Americans would be landing in the early hours. Therefore, prior to the main force arriving, 225 men of the 2nd Ranger...
Also, you know what's scary? I never forget this. Everybody, I think you guys know this legendary urban legend or interview, I don't know. People that actually landed in Omaha Beach said that the most realistic movie they've ever seen was the beginning scene of Saving Private Ryan. And I always thought that's so horrifying. Because if you watch the beginning scene of Saving Private Ryan, it's horrifying. People fucking blow up, their hands are left and right, everybody is screaming. And the guys that actually were there said this is the most realistic decryption.
Battalion,
That it's not
commanded by
movie
Lieutenant
effects, but it's
Colonel
actually
James
very, very
Rudder,
real.
were given the unenviable task
It gave
of scaling
PTSD
the
to
cliffs
actual
with
veterans.
ropes and ladders in an effort
That's for
to
even crying in the
destroy
theaters.
gun battery. The Rangers approached in
Some had to
12
leave the
landing
theater.
craft and 2
Imagine the smell of Omaha Beach.
amphibious trucks, but took heavy fire as they neared the beach. One landing craft was lost, with all but one of its occupants.
No shit.
They then began placing the 100-foot-long ladders borrowed from the London Fire Brigade up against the cliffs.
Shout out to the
and
London
began
Fire
to
Brigade.
scale them, all the while still taking heavy enemy machine gun and mortar fire. With Allied
smell
warships
gasoline.
providing fire support, the Rangers reached the top of the cliff, where they discovered that their intended targets, the field guns, had been moved. The Rangers eventually located the weapons, left unguarded in an orchard over half a kilometer to the south.
Unguarded in an
proceeded to
orchard.
destroy them. Their mission was accomplished, but now the Rangers had to contend with heavy combat with the Germans over the next 24 hours, until
you
they
don't
would
sleep
be
during that
relieved
time.
by additional reinforcements, by which time they'd suffered 77 men killed and 152 wounded. If the banks of well-protected German gunners were not enough, the beach was also protected
bunker.
by a wealth of obstacles, both natural and man-made, that the landing craft would have to navigate. A difficult job made worse by incredibly powerful winds that blew more than one flat-sided landing craft off course. At 630 hours, the first wave, comprising men of the 1st and 29th...
I heard this legend, you guys will probably tell me. Every boat had a secret guy in it that would fuck you up if you didn't want to leave the boat. There was like this secret dude, and he was like a commissar. He was like, oh, you don't want to fight? We have a problem here, man. Is that true?
Made their landings amidst what must have seemed like an
legend?
wall of bullets. In the spaces between the landing craft and positions of some cover in front of Germans, bodies of fallen US troops soon began to litter the sands. What
does NCO stand for? This isn't the first wave? Yeah, oh, there we have some dead. There we have some dead. Oh shit.
There was so
it's in a educational context though, right, Twitch admin?
much death on Omaha Beach in the opening rounds of the invasion.
Non-commissioned
when
officer
were seen leaving the beach again. The Germans mistakenly told their commander, General Dietrich Kreis, that the American troops had been driven off.
Why would you say
then
that?
ordered many of the troops guarding Omaha to relocate to fight off the British forces at Gold Beach. This was a major error, for the landing craft was simply returning back to the ships
and NCO's like a team leader.
More US troops to throw at the German defenses. Yet, despite this, even with the aid of combat engineers blasting away at fixed defenses, warships providing fire support,
what are you doing there,
tanks
man?
being landed to support assaults against the defenders, the US troops failed to secure their beachhead and link up with the British forces from Gold Beach on D-Day itself. Instead, however, they managed to secure 2 strong points on the beach, from where, over the following days, they were able to offload men and supplies and finally clear out the German defenders, securing the beach.
It's like that moment where you get invaded in HOI4 and you're like, I can beat this, but suddenly you see your enemy has supply now. They're not attritioning anymore. They built the harbor and they have heavy tanks. Now you're fucked.
Up with the allied units from other beaches. A number of
this makes me want to play HOI4. I'm so excited for the roleplay game tomorrow. I chose my nation, but I'm not gonna tell what it is. It's a major though.
Named Martha Gellhorn. Wife of author Ernest Hemingway, Gellhorn was not actually authorized to report on the landings, and so, in a rather daring move, stowed away aboard a hospital ship and then impersonated a stretcher bearer in order to join medical teams going ashore.
They should make a movie about her.
The wounded. Given the chaos of the dramatic events that were unfolding around her, she was able to pull off this deception and become the only woman to land at on D-Day, allowing her to give a first-hand account of the scene. Her article, published in the Collier magazine, reads as following.
Oh, here we go.
Everyone was violently busy on that crowded, dangerous shore. The pebbles were the size of apples and feet deep, and we stumbled up a road that a huge road shovel was scooping out. We walked with the utmost care between the narrowly placed white tape lines that marked the mine-cleared path, and headed for a tent marked with a red cross. Everyone agreed that the beach was a stinker, and that it would be a great pleasure to get the hell out of here sometime. In planning for D-Day, Utah Beach was the last to be selected, and it extended over 11 miles of shoreline, making it the largest beach hit on June 6th. As the westernmost beach, the main aim of establishing a beachhead at Utah was to give the Allies a suitable location to prepare for an assault on the strategic harbor town of Cherbourg, some 35 miles away. Assaulting the beach was the US 7 Corps, who faced relative...
Media personnel was sent in last. I think some viewers will watch some James Ryan today. I just seen James Ryan some months ago, because Lisa didn't know it. And Lisa is a normie, right? A normal human being, and she was very terrified by that movie. Which makes sense. It's a terrifying movie, man. The way people die is fucking insane. Especially one of the most horrifying scenes in cinema history, right? Much more horrifying than any horror movie. When the German soldier is fighting with the guy, and he has the knife, and he says, just let it go. Just let it happen. And he fucking... That scene stuck with me, bro.
A single powerful
fuck that shit.
88mm artillery piece, which was soon destroyed, and the German defenders manning it surrendered. Within 3 hours of the start of the assault, all 3 major entrances to the beach had been secured, permitting 20.
Yeah, and his friend watched him die, true. His friend was too scared to help, yeah.
To cross Utah
He was
Beach
downstairs
on
doing
D-Day.
nothing.
Among those fighting on Utah Beach was Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr.
Wait, is that his son?
Of former US President.
Dude, the Roosevelt family is so alpha. This guy gave a speech with a bullet in his hip, man. I don't know much about you Americans, but these Roosevelts seem like fucking giga-chats, man.
Theodore Roosevelt.
Holy smokes.
Brigadier General Roosevelt was serving with the 4th Infantry Division when it stormed Utah Beach. Going ashore with his men, Roosevelt took command of almost every aspect of his division's operations that day, allowing him to directly address the many problems that emerged. It was even reported that
I want to play HOI4 better right now, like multiplayer. Thank you, Interim Man.
Like a traffic
Hate that
cop,
scene, yeah.
whilst personally taking enemy fire, all the while sharing poetry and amusing anecdotes.
What side do you
with
root for, though?
Soldiers under his command.
I've always, as a German, my entire life, I always wanted to see a Hollywood-style movie from a German World War II soldier. And only recently it's starting with Germany making Our Mothers and Our Fathers, the first real movie showing a German side. Look, I fully agree you should demonize the Germans in World War II. 100%, I agree with this. We kind of represent evil, yes. But you can't fucking tell me that every single soldier was an evil guy trying to gas Jews and eat children, man. A lot of these guys were indoctrinated fools like Russians nowadays that thought they're doing something good. They were normal people with families, and I would love to see a Hollywood-style movie where we see a German perspective. Like, in the beginning, he's really... And again, I know we have stuff like Invest Nick's Noise, All Quiet on the Western Front, but in the beginning, he's young and he's like, yeah, Hitler, 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 and then he sees what happens and everything is fucking shit. And the premise of the movie is, holy shit, man, what happened here in Germany is fucking bad, really, really bad.
For his gallantry, he was recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross. Tragically, however...
I think it's very important, though, that every human being, most of them, some people are just straight up fucking serial killers, are humans. Even Russians on the Eastern Front of Ukraine right now are fucking humans. But they were indoctrinated. They have alcohol problems, propaganda for decades. They grew up in communism, and then 1991 they grew up with all these corrupt leaders. And the fuck they're gonna do, man? You know, they're still evil. They're gonna get wrecked for what they're doing, like the Germans got wrecked. But I think it's just important to never forget. This is not a video game. They're not AI. They're fucking human beings.
Over a month later, on July 12th, he passed away due to a heart attack. Afterwards, the recommendation was upgraded to the Medal of Honor, the highest award.
Our granddads were fighting each other, now I pay you $5 a month. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I genuinely believe, you guys always joke, if these soldiers could see us nowadays, they would laugh because everybody is gay and has pink hair. I think our great-granddads that were fighting in World War II would be very happy that you and me are just talking to each other now and we're friends. And then they would be like, so, you and your international friends, what are you doing? Well, great-granddad that died in World War II, I'm playing a World War II game every day. I make a lot of money with it. And we encircle and kill people every single day. Imagine explaining that to them, bro. You fucking die in World War II and your great-grandson is fucking playing a video game where you get killed every 2 seconds, man.
The United States for valor, which he was awarded posthumously.
Dude, life is full of irony, I swear to God. It's
quote,
so fucked up.
Although the enemy had the beach under constant direct fire, Brigadier General Roosevelt moved from one locality to another, rallying men around him, directed and personally led them against the enemy. Under his seasoned, precise, calm, and unfaltering leadership, assault troops reduced beach strongpoints and rapidly moved inland, with minimum casualties. He thus contributed substantially to the...
One sec, I don't know if this is correct, but I think a year ago I made a picture of my Nazi grandpa on my phone. The problem is we Germans, we don't know much about our great-grandparents. They never really talked about what they did and stuff. I got it! I got the Nazi grandpa pictures! Here's my culture! Ladies and gentlemen, I have both the Nazi grandpas right in front of me. Number one, we're gonna start small. This is my grandma, she's still alive. This is my grandma in Stahlhelm and the Nazi boots. And I don't know anything about equipment, but I think he was... I have no idea. Was he police or something? He was police in Poland. That's where his letters came from. He was a police officer in Poland. And then he got fucked when the Russians came. So, here we have the other Nazi grandpa. This little kid is my grandpa. That's my grandpa who changed my life, who was a great man to me. And that's his brother. I forgot his name. I never really met him. And that was the grandpa. And I think he told me once that this guy was on the Eastern Front and he retreated. And in some village, as he retreated, a grenade fucked him up. That's what he told me years ago. And finally, here's the other grandpa. So this is from my grandpa, the father, and now my grandma's father. That's him when he was visiting his family. The girl in the middle is my grandma. And I think now, and here we see there's a different picture where he has a hat from the Air Force. A good timing, Twitch and ad. And this is my great-grandfather, that's the guy who was police in Poland, I think. My Nazi grandpas. And now I play fucking video games about them.
Primarily by the British 50th Northumberland Infantry Division and the 47 Royal Marine Commando. And their primary objective was to capture the harbour town of Arromanches, which had been selected as an ideal site for the building of a mulberry harbour. Waiting for the British at Gold.
My grandpa was a flag gunner during D-Day. Oma, typist for Luftwaffe, escaped to Dresden a few days before bombed. Both loved Yanks, but hated Russians. My grandpa she's still alive, has a sister. And that sister married a man. But this man wrote a lot of books. And he wrote a book once of how he escaped East Germany when the Russians came. There's this scene I'll never forget. This was like 3 or 4 years ago. I was already together with Lisa. And at my grandpa's funeral, we were in a restaurant. And his sister and this husband, very old people, he's like fucking 88 or some shit, man. They're in the restaurant, we talk about the war and stuff. And he said, and the crazy thing is, anyone in chat who ever talked to a real person that was in a real war, you see it in their eyes. I'll never forget how he talks about his book. And I'm a guy who's very interested in people. I always ask questions. I'm like, oh, what is about the book about? It's us. It's me as a kid, as a fucking 8-year-old leaving Dresden. And, oh, you were living in Dresden back then? Oh, yeah, I saw it burn. Like, what? And what they did is, apparently, it's a true story. Why would he lie? His family, they had lots of kids, and his parents and everything, they would leave Dresden. And Dresden is in a valley, right? And they went up the hill. And they were walking all day, walking, and suddenly they hear... And they're like, what the fuck? So they like stand up and they go to the valley, and they look into the valley, into Dresden, and he sees the fire of hell burning. He sees all of Dresden burn. He's a fucking kid. 8 years old, and he stands on this hill, imagine this, and he sees real life, how Dresden just gets utterly smashed, and he just watches this for hours, man. Just watches it, man. And then he wrote it down. Imagine making experiences like that, man. That is... Bro. And he had a good life, though. He's a normal guy. Nothing weird or anything. Had a big family and very successful company, man.
Beach were elements of the Wehrmacht.
Lots of Nazis in my family, bro.
Which included a large proportion of Osttruppen, Poles and Russians who had been conscripted to serve in the German army.
Oh, Russians in the German army?
The beach was protected by a battery of 4 155mm guns, positioned around half a mile inland. Unfortunately for the British, an unexpected northwest wind...
My grandpa died in a submarine sank by the Japanese. They didn't know until 2013.
Submerged as the British landing craft began to storm the beach. Able to identify all of them, the British force would suffer the loss of some...
My great-grandpa didn't go to the Spanish Civil War because he was registered as a woman. Damn, he was really ahead of his time.
Before they could get their troops and equipment to shore. Owing to the weather, the swimming Shermans had to be moved closer to shore before they could be put into the water, followed later by Churchill AVREs. But by midday, they were fully engaged in driving the Wehrmacht troops from their positions.
I always feel like if you're a German that gets captured on D-Day, you're kind of fine. You're like, dude, I'm out of this. I'm safe. I'm probably not going to die here, dude. They're going to kind of treat me normal. I think the best lottery ticket for German was to be captured by the West, you know, by Americans, man. That's probably the best thing that could happen to you.
However, they would continue to take heavy fire.
My grandfather was 40.
At the Le Hamel strongpoint until mid-afternoon, when the AVREs destroyed the fortification protecting them. By day's end, the British force had pushed inland, securing
Meanwhile, in Japan,
and allowing construction of the Mulberry Pier to begin. But this came at the cost of 400 British casualties.
Jesus Christ. My grandfather was a good friend with Simo Reyes.
At just 2 miles long, Juno Beach was the smallest of the D-Day beaches, being positioned between Gold and Sword to the west and east respectively, and was objective of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, the Canadian 2nd Armoured Brigade, and the British No. 48 Commando. The beach's small size only served to exacerbate Allied planners' fears concerning the
exchange DLC for
waters leading up to the beach, requiring landings to begin at 745 hours, when the tide was at its highest, reducing the risk to the
You
landing
really put that
craft.
into practice in Bannerlord?
However, it turned out that it would not be nature's
He has a
obstacles
bicycle,
that
dude.
savaged the
The fuck?
Canadians, but instead the German mines littering the coastline. A horrifying 1/3 of all landing crafts struck
Wow.
mines as they advanced.
What the fuck is this bicycle, bro? You're going to skate in a skate park? What the fuck? What is that famous BMX driver called? Matt? But there was Tony Hawk and BMX had Matt. What was his name?
The beach, where the
He's a
German
messenger. Ching ching, I have a message. There's an MG42 around the corner. Ching ching.
Infantry Division's 736th Regiment, plus the 430th Ost Eastern Battalion, again comprised of Russians and Poles, were waiting.
Wow, I never knew that.
The defenders
That's
fought
crazy.
a bloody and brutal battle to drive the Canadians off the beach. But the Canadians stubbornly refused to let the beach turn into another Dieppe, and they kept the pressure up.
Oh, I want to play Hell
eventually
Loose so bad right
forcing
now.
the
dude.
Germans
But it's
to withdraw.
such a shit game.
By the end of the day, some 21,400 troops had landed at Juno, and the Canadians had pushed further inland than any from the D-Day landings, capturing an airfield at TommyKay. However, it had cost the Canadians 946 casualties, of which 340 were killed when their landing craft struck mines in the first hour of the invasion. One of those serving on Juno Beach that day was a young Canadian officer named James Doohan, who would later go on to worldwide fame.
Wow,
portraying
what?
The iconic character of Scotty in the Star
Dude,
Trek
fucking
TV
legend.
series
Lands on D-Day and
Doohan was a
then
commissioned
becomes part of the Star
lieutenant
Trek
in
crew.
the 14th Field Artillery Regiment,
What the
of
fuck?
3rd Canadian Infantry Division. And on D-Day, he was tasked with leading his men across a field littered with anti-tank mines in order to capture a German position, with Doohan
Fucking
killing
mines,
2
man, they
German
suck.
snipers in the process. At around
Wow.
1120 hours, during a lull in the fighting, he stopped to smoke a cigarette
Oh,
before
no.
making his way back to his
What
men,
happens now?
when a terrified Canadian machine gunner opened up fire on him, believing him to be a German. He was shot 6 times, 4 in the leg, 1 in the chest, and 1 which took off his right middle finger.
He survived
In a
that.
classic tale of luck in wartime,
No
his
way.
life was saved by the metal cigarette tin he
With something like this, I always wonder. Imagine you're a kid right now watching this, and your great-granddad, how do you say in English? He gave this to you.
carried in
Jesus.
his chest pocket, which absorbed the shot aimed at his chest, which
Imagine you
almost
would own
certainly
something like that. You
would
will
have killed
cherish
him.
it so hard, right?
Later in life, while filming Star Trek, efforts had to be made to disguise the finger he lost on D-Day, with a hand double used for close-up shots that were required.
What a legend, bro.
Sword was the easternmost beach on D-Day, and prior to the war was a popular tourist destination, with numerous summer houses dotting the coastline. Many of these houses
Unfortunately, my family never handed anything down. I know I have nothing. I have 1 watch from my grandpa. Also, if I die, I have nothing to hand down. I have a bunch of fucking manga DVDs, bro.
had been destroyed by the German defenders to improve their field of
I
fire.
have crippling
while
depression
others
from
had
my
been
dad, that's for
reinforced
sure.
And turned into
You can hand down your
makeshift
Steam
bunkers,
library. Your
with a
magic
anti-tank
card.
ditch being
Steam
dug
account is good,
behind
though.
the sea wall. The beach was also defended by 2 field gun positions, with 75mm
My grandpa's
guns
a Japanese
based at
military
Merville,
sword he got from his
and
great-grandpa.
harder-hitting
Fuck, man.
155mm guns at Le Havre. And these received special attention from Allied aircraft and
You have the black
paratroopers
plate.
to prevent them from interfering in the landings. Beginning at 725 hours, when the tide was right, Sword was
You
assaulted
give away your
by the
apartment? Yeah, but
British
there's no
Army's 3rd
sentimental
Division,
value. Like, it's not like I had it in my
supported by
ass
the
while I
27th
was in a
Armoured
prison camp in
Brigade
Vietnam.
And contingents of British and Free French commandos. The primary objective of the forces landing on Sword Beach was to capture a series of important bridges 3.5 miles inland on the River Orne and the Caen
You were in
Canal.
Nam?
These bridges were being held by British airborne forces, while the commandos had to fight their way west to link up with Canadian forces from Juno.
One thing I'm gonna ask pragmatic stuff. I never really understand in video games. A paratrooper is better than everyone else. Why is a commando / paratrooper so much better than basic infantry on D-Day? All of them don't really have battle experience. There wasn't really any fighting. Did they just get more training? I guess just more training, right? But combat experience-wise, they're the same as a basic soldier, right? They have better stats. Well, they probably have better stats because of equipment.
However, having landed on the beaches, further advancement was slow going. Thanks in part to the heavy congestion
were in North
of Allied
Africa before.
forces squashed into the narrow
Also, if you're the
streets
best
and
in training, they
side
put you
roads
into
of
the
French
special forces.
coastal
Okay.
towns, and fierce German resistance from the town of
Also, they were
Wiesenhausen.
soldiers before.
Through the
Normal
day,
soldiers
it
have
became
just been
apparent
conscripted.
that
Okay,
any
that
hope
makes
of
sense.
linking with the Canadians before nightfall had been dashed when, to the British's horror, they found themselves under attack by the 21st Panzer Division. These skilled German panzer crews
Isn't that the division that gets utterly obliterated by Brad Pitt and Shia LaBeouf?
made powerful attacks on the British, including the men holding the bridge on the River Orne and helping to block them from linking with the Canadians at Juno. But their effectiveness was hampered by disruptions to their chain of command and overwhelming air power pitted against them. As Allied gliders landed nearby their positions in late evening, the panzer crews feared they were being overrun. They retreated, unaware that the gliders had actually missed their designated landing zones and had landed there
Information is so
purely
important
by
in war,
mistake.
man.
At sea, 3 German E-boats of the 5th Torpedo Squadron slipped from their moorings and dashed out to attack the many Allied vessels supporting the landing, perhaps hoping to repeat the carnage they inflicted during Operation Tiger. The E-boats arrived off Sword Beach to find the scene largely obscured by a smoke screen, forcing them in closer. Emerging from the smoke,
Yeah, the
they
Fury
were
ending was
confronted
so
by the
ridiculous, man. I mean, come on.
awe-inspiring
Wow!
sight of hundreds of Allied
Holy
vessels,
shit!
ranging from small landing craft.
Is that all carriers, man? Alto, that's a fleet. Holy shit, bro.
To enormous battleships.
Oh!
They dispatched 18
How much
torpedoes
fuel
into
that
the
must
Allied
use?
force, but only succeeded in
Photoshopped.
sinking a free Norwegian destroyer, the Svena, before being forced to retreat.
Poor Norwegian.
This was the end of German naval interference on D-Day, as Allied air
That was a
power
photo from
was
after the
so
war.
overwhelming that to put any warships or U-boats to sea in daylight was practically suicidal. However, German sailors did continue the fight by manning coastal guns alongside their Wehrmacht comrades. As for Germany's air force, a handful of sorties were ordered against the ships supporting the landings and the beaches. The most notable encounter perhaps being when 2 Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighters swooped down and strafed British troops at Sword Beach. 2-engined Stuka dive bombers also made desperate daylight attacks, but were savaged by Allied fighters
got
at
savaged.
almost every step of the way. During the day, 28,500 men crossed Sword Beach,
Damn,
but in the
bro. That's
hard
so many people landing
campaign
on
to
that one
capture
day.
it, they sustained 683
There's not even that many
casualties.
casualties if you
The
think
British
about it.
and French forces would finally link
The
up
first
with
initial
the
landing?
Canadians
It's pretty
from
good.
Juno the next day. Yet, despite the horrors the
Stuka
troops were seeing,
ASMR.
many of them
I think
just
that's an niche
young
on
men
YouTube.
barely beginning their adult lives, it seems the old carry-on spirit had not been a casualty that day. As David Teacher, a member of the RAF 71 Beat
No fucking way. 12-hour-long Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber siren sound relaxation white noise. What? Me when I play HOI4 Germany. Am I right, guys? I'm playing this and my Polish grandfather is currently breakdancing on the floor.
unit said
I'm so
afterwards.
relaxed right now.
Slowly we overcame all the nightmares.
Oh
There was no lack of humour. A soldier coming ashore asked, "Is this a private beach?" I was promised a private beach. If not, I am not staying. And we heard,
And I want to
"My
play
mother
Hella
told
Loose
me
now.
not
Fuck.
to
Thank you,
travel by
Kaiserman.
air.
What's up?
She thought it was much safer by sea."
The Führer's response.
The initial
Rage
German
quit.
response to
Thank you,
D-Day
Matolo.
was one of confusion.
You're
as
not a
to what to
Pokemon?
do.
No,
The
no.
rigid command structure relied heavily on orders from the Führer, but of course he was still asleep as the Allies landed on the beaches. The picture was still somewhat confused to German high command, and having laboured for so long on the belief that any landing away from Calais was a decoy, they argued over whether or not to wake Hitler until they knew more as to what was actually taking place. It wouldn't be until approximately 10 AM, with the arrival of Albert Speer, the German armaments minister, that Hitler was finally awoken. According to the author and historian Stephen Ambrose, who penned the epic book Band of Brothers, Hitler's response was rather unexpected, uttering the words, "The news couldn't be better." Goebbels, too, noted that the news of the invasion seemed to come as a relief to him, as though they
If that isn't the biggest cope in history, I don't know.
could finally get on with the war in the West. Hitler was both supremely confident of his men in Normandy holding off the Allies, and stuck to his belief that Calais was where the real invasion would come over the next few days. Now the German high command was awake, Hitler began to organize his response. One of his first acts was to reluctantly release 2 reserve panzer divisions near Paris to be sent to Normandy. However, he was told that Allied air power over Normandy and the surrounding areas was so intense that they would have to wait until nightfall to move, lest they be destroyed on the roads by Allied fighter bombers.
Maybe
This
Putin should have
crucial
moved more at
delay
night,
worked
huh?
in favor of the Allies, who, by nightfall, were already pushing beyond the beaches. Incredibly, despite the enormity of what was happening in Normandy, Hitler still took time in the afternoon to attend a reception for the new Austrian foreign minister in Salzburg, perhaps hinting that
The fucking cope. He must be shaking deep inside at this point.
failed to fully grasp the
Oh, we lost
reality
Curson?
of
Cool,
what was
imagine better
happening in
news.
France. As darkness fell in the final hours of June 6th,
Luckily,
the
Germany
U-boats
didn't have nukes.
finally
Hitler would have
ventured out
fucking
to
nuked
sea
everyone.
in an effort
We're
to
very lucky
disrupt
there
the
was no
landing
nukes on the Nazi
operations.
side, bro.
Even with the cover of darkness,
That would have been
the fear
probably
of air attack
the
was
end.
still there, as Allied warplanes were now using radar to detect them on the surface. However, they did
There wasn't
not
Horthy,
arrive
there
until
was,
the daylight hours of June
Wait, was that Horthy? It looked like Dönitz. That could have been Horthy, though.
7th, allowing Allied air and sea power to swoop in, attacking them as they recharged their batteries on the surface. 2 U-boats were sunk and 4 more heavily
There was
damaged,
Horthy, yeah.
forcing the
Was his
German
loss.
Navy to abandon any attack with U-boats.
And there's this video game which is kind of cool. I never really... It was too deep. There's this game. You are a German U-boat in 1939, and you just do whatever you want. You're a U-boat, and you have like 5 years, right? And you just go out, and you kill Allied vessels all the time. And then you go back to the harbor, and you build it up, and you improve your shit and stuff. That's not Silent Hunter. I don't think so. I think that could be the one. It's like an RPG U-boat game. Yeah, and then you can just go everywhere you want. U-boat and fishing 2 simulator. What the fuck? How about a sub-goal? How about a sub-goal?
Not yet
I'm just trying to
fitted
get
with
subs, guys. I'm
snorkels
dying.
that could allow them to run their diesel
Jin good
engines
now, no
while
cap?
submerged. The only U-boats with snorkels were based in the south, in
Fuck
the
up.
Bay of Biscay, and in the north of Norway, to better allow them to attack convoys from the United States.
I can
And
explain
it would
the game
take
to you
them
if you need it.
until
I hate that.
mid-June to break through.
Can I hop into a call with you, Tommy, and explain the game to you? I just want to
dense
experience
Allied
my shit, bro.
anti-submarine forces are
Imagine you have sex for the first time and fucking KKK guy walks in. So here's what you do. You just want
against
to...
them,
I want
by
to do my
which
own
time
shit.
the invasion force was dug in.
Sellout
and
streamer?
breaking out
Bro, I
into
gotta
France.
survive
German
somehow.
resistance remained strong around the beachheads of Normandy for days afterwards. And even as the Allied troops began to move out, pockets of German resistance remained.
Look at that epic camouflage, bro. He took that very serious.
Even as they became encircled by the Allied invasion force. One German unit manning a bunker situated between Sword and Juno beaches, which housed a radar installation, held out for a staggering 12 days after D-Day,
Wow.
despite having found themselves well behind Allied lines
Wow.
at that point. After establishing their
What's
beachhead,
their story?
over the summer the Allied force would grow and become more powerful. Eventually, it would burst outward and charge across Europe, pushing Hitler's army back as Nazi Germany was choked to death by the Allied onslaught. 11 months and 1 day after D-Day, Germany surrendered, and the war in Europe was over.
And I always say this, imagine what it must feel like when you win a war. Like, you're an American soldier, you went through so much shit, man. And then you get the message. They got it, it's over, Germany surrendered.
Looking
Even.
back on June 6th and the days
What a
that
feeling
followed,
that must
we
be,
tend
winning
to
a
take
war.
for granted the
And then you
success
shipped off
of
to
the D-Day
Asia.
landings. They are remembered in the West, particularly
Probably
in the
shit because you
United
lost all your
States,
friends. I
United
think you will
Kingdom, and
actually
Canada
feel joy
as
in moments
amongst
like
the
this.
most glorious of days when the greatest generation rose to the challenge. Sadly, like many battles throughout history, D-Day has become romanticized in such a way as to overlook the horrific reality of what
true.
took place.
Very well said.
It's easy to quote casualty figures as a way of measuring the cost of what truly happened, but the battle for Normandy no doubt damaged the lives of hundreds of thousands who, while they survived, had to live with the memories of the horror they saw.
And one thing I just realized recently with the Ukraine war is you have to imagine a traumatized soldier is not the only thing that happens. It's also their children and grandchildren, especially their children. A traumatized soldier is gonna, unfortunately, be a bad influence for children. They're gonna drink, they're gonna be weird, they're gonna hit their children. One thing I truly believe in nowadays, as I see it in Germany with my family and stuff, is that when men come back from war, or when there is a war, it's generations that get damaged. It's not just one generation. It's not just that one soldier who's traumatized. It's generations. And that's the problem with, for example, something I see with the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war will one day be over, but for generations, for 50 to 100 years, they will be traumatized to shit from that stuff, man. And that's something I realized in the last years. That's also big about war. A war has damage for... Dude, I always say this, right? My dad is a big alcoholic today in 2023, and I think because of Hitler. Sounds weird. Adolf Hitler started a world war. Then the father of my dad's mother, my grandma, came not home, and the mom got super fucked up. She drank a lot of alcohol. She had like 8 children. She was fucked. So she raised my grandma very bad. My grandma was a fucked up human being. Then this grandma will raise my dad in a very fucked up way. Lots of alcohol, no love, because no one could ever show love in the family. And then my dad was fucked up and coped with alcoholism till this day today. And in a weird way, the truth is that the existence of Adolf Hitler made my dad an alcoholic, right? That's just the truth. Like, I really believe in this. And that's generational trauma. Look how much impact a war really has for 100 years, for 3 generations, man. I'm the first generation that breaks through that now, right?
And perhaps it is really for them that when we celebrate their victory every year on June 6th, we recognize
explains why baby boomers are generally alcoholic racists
in Europe. It is because we enjoy such freedoms now in the 21st century afforded to us by those incredible soldiers that probably more than any other military operation in history, D-Day has left us pondering many questions.
But without Hitler, there would be no HOI4 though. Yeah, I would actually still work in the supermarket. Thanks, Hitler.
Their success during Operation Tiger.
It all started with Adolf's mom. Look, and here's the thing, Ruben. You can't take the story forever. But Hitler did that because of his fucked up home, where his dad was kind of an asshole. But Hitler's dad also got that from somewhere. And step by step, you see hundreds of years of trauma that just keeps going on, right? And I truly believe this. I'm dead serious. I think our generation's goal as possible parents one day, a lot of you, not the non-subs, don't look right now, will be dads one day. And I think our duty in this life, in our existence, is to teach our children, or to be such a good parent that our children do not have this trauma anymore. I think that's a really, really big point of my life, should be of everyone's life. We should try to raise and educate children to break the circle of trauma and finally become functioning human happy beings, right? And that's kind of a big life goal, I think, of millennials.
Landing ships. What if Eisenhower had ignored Stagg's recommendation to delay, and the D-Day landings went ahead amidst the bad weather of June 5th? What if Hitler had listened to Rommel and placed tanks closer to the beaches prior to D-Day? What if, for any one of a million reasons, D-Day failed? What then? Atomic bombs dropped in Europe, perhaps?
Yep.
Or maybe a Europe that would end the war fully under the control of the Soviet Empire.
Yeah, I just realized that like 2 days ago. A big reason for D-Day wasn't just to take down Hitler and stuff. It was also to make sure that Russia doesn't take all of Europe. I never thought about that. That was a big mission about
what ifs and many more will always remain simply questions for debate, thanks to the success of June 6th, 1944. Operation Overlord. D-Day.
Nice video, man.
What are you still doing here, mate? Jeez. Well, if you want to see more, click these videos. Have fun. Looking good, boy.